Hello, my name is Kyle Pugh with Webucator. During this video, I'll be demonstrating a process of managing your errors in your C# projects. This demonstration is based on a blog post provided by the website, thecodingguys.net. I'd like to thank thecodingguys.net for allowing us to record this video and share it with you. For the full article, feel free to visit the URL provided below. Alright, so here I am inside of Microsoft Visual Studio. I've created a simple console application and called it Managing Errors. Now, before we get into here and get our hands dirty and start to write some code, I want to do a big picture. You know, why this video? Why this topic of managing errors? Well, in every computer application release, there's always the potential of problems, errors, or what we might refer to as bugs. These problems or these bugs, they can happen at any point within the application. What we want to be able to do as the developer of this application is catch these errors. I get input from a user, right? Maybe this input's coming in from some interface that I provided. And the user, unfortunately, maybe gives me bad data, incorrect data. Well, I pass that into my system. If it's incorrect data, I'm potentially going to have an error that's thrown by my application. So once again, as the developer, I want to catch that error and then handle that error. And don't just let the application crash, but I want to handle the error. So once again, here I am inside of Microsoft Visual Studio, and I'm going to create just a simple little block of code, nothing big, but this is going to help demonstrate and lead us into discussion on how we can catch an error and handle that error appropriately. So once again, I've created a simple little console application. Within this console application, I've been given a main method, the static void main method here. And within that main method, I'm going to create this simple little block of code. So once again, big picture. I'm going to create a little interface through the console application that I can retrieve information from my user. So let's try this out. First thing I'm going to do here is create a variable. This is going to be a string variable, or I'm going to be collecting text information. And we're just going to call this X, just for the lack of a better name. And I'm going to initialize this X variable holding a null value. Nothing within it at this point. I'm going to create one more variable here. This is going to be an integer variable. We'll just call it A. And I am going to initialize this one with a value of 10. All right, so two little variables there. And we're going to end up using those within this console application. So now I'm going to create one more line here where I'm going to prompt the user through the console application to provide some information. I'm going to have them provide me with a number. So I'm going to access the console. I'm going to utilize the WriteLine method. Oh, WriteLine. And I'm going to say something like, please enter a number. Just again, prompting the user for some information. All right. So now, once the user types that information into the console window, I now want to gather that information and be able to use it within my application. So back to that variable that I created earlier, that string X variable, which currently holds a value of a null value. I'm now going to associate or store within that X variable the information the user's typed in. So once again, I'll go back to my console. I am now going to read the line. I want to get that information that the user has now typed in. All right. So now that I'm carrying that information within my application stored inside of this variable called X, I now want to do something with that user input and something with it within my application. Here, I'm going to do some simple little math. So I'm going to, again, go back to my console, and I'm going to write something back out to the screen to the user. So I'll use the WriteLine method. And anytime we get information from the console window from the user, it's being treated as a string, as a text value. So before I can do any type of mathematical operations with it, I now need to parse that into an int or into an integer. So I'm going to take that X value that the user passed in, and I want to turn it into an integer. So we'll take that X. All right, now that we've got it stored as an integer, I'm now just going to add that a variable to it, which, if you recall from earlier, was a was equal to 10. All right. So we've got this nice little interface through the console application where we're prompting the user, hey, please enter a number. They type something in. We then gather that value. We turn it into an integer, and now we're doing some math with it. All right, I'm going to do one more line here. Again, access the console. All right, let's try this out. I'm going to go ahead and save my application. And I'm going to preview it. I'm going to hit the F5 key on my keyboard to be able to run or execute my application. I'm just going to launch up my Windows console window where we can see our prompt. Hey, please enter a number. So I'll type something in. I'll say 10. There we go. I've got my math going on with my application. We receive that information from the user. We've turned that value from a string into an integer and doing our math. 10 plus 10, 20. I think I got my math right. All right, I'm going to hit my enter key here. This will read the line and it's going to close out my application. All right. Now, this is great. I've got a simple little application. Now, I want to send this out to the world. All right, but again, we're getting information from the users. And I'm not guaranteeing at this point that I'm going to get back the proper information from the users. They could type in a number, like I did there. They could type in something else, like an alpha character. Now what happens? Can we take an alpha character like the letter K and turn that into an integer? That's what our application does, right? It takes the information from the user and then converts it into an integer and does some mathematical operation on it. Let's try it out. So I'm going to hit the F5 key once again, run my application. I'm going to type in an alpha character this time. I'll use the letter K. I'm going to hit my enter key. Uh-oh, what happened here? I've got an unhandled exception. It's telling me that the format exception has run. So the data that got passed into me, the format of that data was incorrect. I'm expecting a number to come through to do some math, right? But the user passed in an alpha character to me. Now what do I do? Well, because we haven't caught this error and handled it, we have an unhandled exception coming through our application, which is really crashing the application. So we need a way to be able to catch that error, catch that exception, and then be able to handle it appropriately. So let's take a look at the code to do this. I'm going to go ahead and close the exception window here, and I'll stop my application. All right. I'm just going to hit my enter key a few times just up here at the top of my main method, just to create some space. And one technique that we're going to utilize to be able to manage an error is utilizing what's called the try-catch block. And this is the process that George diagrams inside of the article found on the website provided earlier in this video. So I'm going to drop in the basic structure, the skeleton of a try-catch block. And then I'm going to start to bring my code into this try-catch block. So my first step, I'm going to bring in try. And then after that, I'll bring in my catch. I'm going to catch an exception within here. We haven't decided what exception we're going to catch inside there yet, but we'll at least get the basic structure here built. So the idea of a try-catch block, remember, I've got a simple little block of code that's potentially an error or a bug's going to show up inside of that code. So what I like to do is before my code runs fully is I'm going to tell it, hey, try this code out. Let's try out this block of code. If there's an error, if there's some exception that comes up, then handle it within the catch block, within the catch area of my code. So try this out. If there's an error, let's catch it and let's handle it right here. Okay? So I'm going to take the code that I wrote earlier. I'm just going to cut this all out from my string variable down to my console.writeLine where I spit out the two variable sum. I'm going to cut that out and I'll paste it up into the try area of my try catch block. So this is the block of code that I want my application to try. Now I want to tell it, well, if there's an error, then let's catch it and do this with the error. So we've created this catch area, and I'm passing in an argument within the catch of an exception. Now, just raw exception or plain exception here is really generic. There's all sorts of different types of exceptions that we can work with and we can potentially catch within our applications. Now, I'm going to talk about just one of them here. If you recall, when I typed in the letter K, we got a format exception. And that's the one I want to catch when our application tries that block of code directly above. So I'm going to take my exception here, and rather than the generic exception, I'm going to ask it to catch the format exception. And we're going to treat that as a variable that I can then use within my application. And we'll just call it FEX. It's a format exception. All right. So now our code will run. It'll try out that block of code up above. If there's an error, it'll catch it, and it's going to pass the error information to us through this variable called FEX. So now we get to tell it what to do. So now inside the catch block, I'm going to come into here and I'm just going to write something out to the screen. Now back out to the console window. So I'll say console.writeLine, and I'm going to spit out the error that comes back. Remember FEX, or the exception that comes back to me. And the exception that gets passed back to us has some information that we can use. And one of them is the message. I want to know what message or what error is coming back to me that's being caught here. All right. So all we're doing is using the same little block of code that we used before, but now I'm saying, hey, try this out. If there's an error, let's catch it and let's handle it efficiently. So let me try running my code once again. Again, I'll hit F5 on my keyboard. This will bring up my console window. There we go. Now notice if I type in a number in here like 10 once again, I get the proper output. 10 plus 10, 20. Great. I'm going to hit my enter key again to cancel my application. And I'm going to run it again. F5, and I'll try passing something in that isn't a number. Let's try the letter K. I type in the letter K, I hit my enter key. Now before, it crashed the application and it brought me back into Visual Studio, essentially into debug mode. Well, now we've handled that exception. We've handled that error, that bug inside of our code. User types in something that we can't turn into an integer, can't do mathematical operations on. Well, we've handled it now, and we've spit out the message from that exception. So the input string was not in the correct format. So there we go. Handling exceptions within our C# applications. Now we can take this several steps further. There's all sorts of different types of exceptions that we can catch. We can bring in the idea of nesting exceptions or catching multiple exceptions. Not only do I want to catch the format exception like in this case, but what if they put in a number that's too big for an integer, too large for it to store inside of this variable that I've created? Well, what happens then? Then I need to be able to catch that exception. And like we saw earlier, we can also utilize the generic exception and just have it catch anything that comes through our application. Give it a try. All right, crack open Visual Studio, open up a new blank console application, and try utilizing the try catch block within your code. All right, so there you have it. A try catch block to help you manage your errors in your C# projects. For this and other topics and tutorials, feel free to jump out to thecodingguys.net.